is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome back. We do want to update you on our breaking news. Greek and Egyptian crews are searching for a missing Egypt Air passenger jet. Flight 804 disappeared several hours ago, shortly after leaving Paris on its way to Cairo. The Airbus A320 may have crashed into the sea. That is according to the Reuters news agency, citing officials. And the airline says the jet went missing north of the Egyptian coast.
Now, it disappeared while flying at an altitude of 37,000 feet. Our Richard Quest telling us this is the safest phase of the flight, so of course it's highly unusual. And as far as the passengers on board, there were 2 infants and a child among them, 66 people in total. Most of the people were Egyptian and French nationals. Earlier, CNN spoke with Ahmed Adel, the vice chairman of the Egypt Air Holding Company, and he gave us a few more crucial details. Listen.
I can give you some facts about the flight. It was Egypt Air 804 from Paris to Cairo. The last contact was at 0045 Zulu time. It's an Airbus 320-200. We had 56 packs on board, plus 3 security personnel, 2 cockpit members, and 5 cabin crew, with a total of 66 passengers. 66 on board, souls on board. And the aircraft had no recorded snags coming out of Cairo into Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. There was no snags reported leaving Charles de Gaulle to Cairo. The captain on the flight has 6,000 hours plus of flying hours, including 2,000 hours on type. The first officer has 4,000 plus hours on type. There was no special cargo on the flight, and no notification to captain with dangerous goods or anything on this flight. Those are the facts as of now. The aircraft, the Airbus 320, has entered service in Egypt Air on the 3rd of November of 2003.
Now, Egypt, of course, is no stranger to headline-making incidents involving planes. Back in November 1985, gunmen hijacked an Egypt Air flight bound for Athens and diverted the jet to Malta. Dozens of passengers were killed after Egyptian troops raided that plane.
And moving forward to October of 1999, after a stopover in New York, Egypt Air Flight 990 crashed into the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 217 people on board. Investigators later concluded that the co-pilot deliberately caused that crash. And separately from Egypt Air, more recently, a Metrojet flight was downed in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, killing all 224 people on board. ISIS claimed responsibility, saying it smuggled a bomb on board the Russian plane. Now, while this was not an Egypt Air flight, last October's crash did raise concerns about security at Egypt's airports.
Our international diplomatic editor, Nick Robertson, joins us now live from London. And of course, Nick, many analysts are starting to fear as they break this down. They know the phase this plane was in at the time at 37,000 feet was cruise mode. So a lot of them now fearing foul play of some sort. What is the word on that as far as the possibility of terrorism?
Well, one of the pieces of information that we've just received here at CNN that you reported a few minutes ago, that in fact there was a distress call from the aircraft, turns on its head a little bit, if you will, some of the early analysis. The early analysis was that the plane was in a safe place in its flight. It was at a cruising altitude, that it suddenly disappeared from the radar. There was no sort of trajectory seen of it descending at any kind of normal rate, which would have given the indication potentially of something catastrophic happening aboard the aircraft without the pilot or the co-pilot's knowledge and ability and time to make a distress call. That was the early information. So now we're being told that there was a distress call, which would then question a little bit how the theory that there could have been some kind of potential explosion from a bomb on board the aircraft. Why do we say that? Because how would the pilot have known about this with enough time to get out a distress call without there being a sort of a downward trajectory rather than just disappearing from the radar at 37,000 feet? So the information now is beginning to become less clear, if you will, and I think we really have to look back at that Metrojet crash, 31st of October last year, where that Russian plane flying from from Sharm el-Sheikh to St. Petersburg was brought down by a bomb that appeared to have been placed in a small soda tin underneath the chair of an aircraft. If we remember, for months after that, Egyptian authorities, Egypt Air, didn't want to believe it was a bomb, stayed away from that. There was information that emerged that was confusing and clouding that issue. So I think we need to be very cautious trying to make an analysis at the moment of what happened. And it is interesting that we're hearing now this contradictory information that there may have been, in fact, a distress call made from the aircraft. But on the surface at the moment, something catastrophic has happened. But now it appears that perhaps the pilot was aware of something happening and was able to make that distress call. We don't know what that distress call was. We don't know who that distress call was made to. We know that the aircraft had just passed out of Greek airspace into Egyptian airspace, which would give the impression, therefore, that the call was made to Egyptian air traffic controllers. Will the audio or transcript be released of that distress call? What was the nature of the distress call? What was said precisely? I think this is going to provide now for investigators key information, but I don't think this is going to stop people at the moment being concerned about potentially, was it a bomb? Therefore, who was in contact with the aircraft before it left Cairo for Paris? Who was in contact with it on the ground in Paris? Checking the passenger manifest to see if any of the passengers had any security flags and concerns about them. And obviously, anyone that would have come into physical contact with that aircraft in Paris and Cairo in the past 24 hours would be under very, very close scrutiny at this time.
And Nick, while we've been talking, we have learned that France is holding an emergency meeting over the missing Egypt airplane. And we can bring up, we've got some live pictures there from Charles de Gaulle Airport. This, of course, is where this plane departed from Paris to Cairo. There is a lot of concern. We know there are French citizens on board, Egyptian citizens and other nationalities as well. And of course, now, as Nick Robertson was pointing out, we're learning this distress call was made from this plane. We don't know the nature of this. I'm sure in the coming hours we will learn more on this. But just reminding our audience, France holding an emergency meeting in relation to this missing aircraft, Egypt Air Flight 804, and there we saw in Charles de Gaulle Airport. We're going to go back to Nick Robertson now. So Nick, this is the thing. The plane departed from Paris, so there is a lot of concern there, and Paris is holding this meeting. Their citizens were involved, and security at the Paris level was involved here too. We don't know, again, we have to emphasize, we don't know the cause of this plane disappearing. But talk to us about what they're likely to be working through in France as they hold this emergency meeting and try to determine what perhaps happened here and what role France perhaps played in this.
Well, there are many things that will be happening in France. As we know, obviously, Airbus is based there in France, so they will have an interest in trying to acquire any information about that airframe and about anything about the history of this particular aircraft that would give them cause for concern. The French authorities will be looking at the airport for anyone that came in contact with the aircraft, physical contact. Were they providing meals, putting those on board the aircraft? Was it the cleaning staff that were in contact with them? But very, perhaps most pertinently, the people that came aboard the aircraft all went through security screening, presumably at Charles de Gaulle Airport. This is a procedure that we're all familiar with now. That would be, it's hard to imagine how that could be subverted at Charles de Gaulle Airport. But they will be looking at all those passengers to make sure they know who was getting on board the plane, what their previous histories were, what their connections were, where they were living prior to getting on board the aircraft, and also looking at the video of the security checks that they would have gone through at the airport to see if there were any abnormalities there. Pieces of all those pieces of information. You know, we have to look at this in the light of that the Metrojet crash. That was the plane that was brought down by a bomb. It took off from Egyptian soil. And we also have to look at this in the light of Paris being the center of ISIS attacks quite recently, and the security and terrorism concerns inside Europe. We have to look at it in that light, but we have no evidence at this time that this was a malicious event of any description. The authorities will be very carefully analysing any data that will have come from the aircraft during its flight as well, to see if there were any abnormalities. At the moment, we're not aware of any, but obviously this now we're being told, and it's significant, I think, that we're learning about this several hours later. We're being told of this distress call. This is coming from Egyptian officials saying that there was a distress call made, which therefore throws into a little more question the character of of the nature of the event that happened on board this aircraft. It seems to indicate that there would have been a period of time where the pilot or co-pilot had time to say something is wrong, I'm going to make a call about it, which seems to mitigate against a catastrophic type of event like a large explosion. That said, the device that brought down the Metrojet plane, the small bomb that was in a small tin can, we have seen similar efforts by terrorist groups recently. Most recently, we've seen it in Somalia, where the amount of explosive material placed on board the aircraft in a laptop computer, this was several months ago, was insufficient to cause the aircraft to crash. So it cannot be ruled out at this stage that there was an explosion, a nefarious explosion on board this aircraft that still gave the co-pilot time to make a call. But again, at this time, there's nothing to indicate that it's a bomb. And obviously, French and Egyptian authorities would be looking very closely at any data coming from the aircraft.
Yes, we just don't know at this stage, but we do know that this is new information, learning that this distress call was made. Of course, we were learning earlier that it wasn't the case. They hadn't confirmed either way. But many thanks to our Nick Robertson joining us there live from London. We're going to take a very short break. We will continue our breaking news on the missing Egypt Air Flight 804. Do stay with us.